We're going to get started. My name is Paul Desmond. I'm the chapter president of the AIS here. Thank you all for coming. This is the last lecture for our AIS Activate series. It'll be with Clement Halsband Architects, with Francis Halsband here, and then Natalie Rebuck presenting on their lecture. I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer Phillips. She is our alumni chair, so she helped plan this, and I definitely couldn't have done it without her or the rest of my exec. Just one quick update. AIS elections for exec is on Wednesday. It's probably been the best decisions of my career here at Ball State. I've been on 3 execs now. Definitely opens your eyes up to architecture and the professionalism of it. So if you're interested, email ais@bsu.edu and state the position you want to run for. Here's Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce Frances Halsband, who is a founding partner of Clement Halsband's Architects in New York City. And she was the first woman to be elected president of the New York chapter for AIA. And she received a Bachelor of Arts from Swarthmore College and Master of Architecture from Columbia University. Also introducing Natalie Rebuck, who is an associate at Clement Halsband's Architects in New York. She actually is an alum from Ball State and holds a Bachelor of Architecture from this college. So please welcome our speakers for today.
Thanks. Let's see if this works. Yes, it works. So apparently I've been told that I was an Emmons professor here maybe 10 or 12 years ago. We're working on the dates, and it does look vaguely familiar. I want to thank you for inviting me back, actually. And I want to say that as soon as I heard that this was a student-sponsored event, I thought that, you know, while I was a very interesting person to myself, I thought that it would be much more interesting for you to meet Natalie, too, who is an associate in our firm and absolutely terrific in many ways. And guess what? She went to Ball State. So I thought that she might be a little closer to the realities of what this whole experience is about. So we're here to do this show together because we actually occasionally work together in our office, which has, I don't know, 25 or 30 people in it. And many of the projects here are actually projects that Natalie and I worked on together, so there's another theme running through this. So that's that. I should tell you a little bit more about me so that we can get Natalie to tell you a little bit more about her. So I'm a New Yorker. I was born in New York. I was raised in New York. I went to school in New York. I took a little bit of a detour to go to Swarthmore, which is in Philadelphia, and I hated it because there were no sidewalks. So I came back to New York as soon as I could and went to Columbia. And well, there are no, you have a few sidewalks here, but not much. And I've been in New York ever since. And my son has the same thing. He won't leave New York either, except that he goes around the world, but he lives in New York. I would say our practice is based in New York, and from the very beginning, Robert Clement and I were both teaching and practicing, and maybe that is why that we started heading in a direction of doing almost all college and university buildings. And so what you'll see today is many of those, and I can go into that later. But here's Natalie.
So I was born and raised in Indiana. I went to Ball State about 8 years ago, dating myself. After school, I was trying to figure out what to do. I sort of was thinking maybe I'll go to grad school, maybe I'll get a job here, you know. And I think I spoke with Tony Costello, and I know some of you know him, and he said, oh, there's this great firm, Clement Halsband Architects. You should send them your resume, you know, see what they're all about. So I sent them my resume, and amazingly, for some reason, they hired me.
Because Tony said so.
And, you know, I've been there ever since. I moved out to New York immediately, and one of the great things about the firm is really that they have an emphasis on early responsibility. So if you are willing and able to take the reins, they will let you. So I have worked on a lot of great projects. You'll see a few in a few minutes. A few that you won't see will be the CFDA Fashion Incubator, which was a Mayor Bloomberg initiative. What else will you not see? Avalon Morningside Park, which was a 20-story apartment complex high-rise. Some planning studies, a Yale planning study. So I worked on a lot of projects managing them and eventually decided I must get licensed. And
key part of the story.
it was a very hard part to moving forward, but it's kind of one of those things where you're not really an architect until you get your license. You can't stamp drawings, and I wanted to be able to stamp those drawings. So soon after I got my license, the firm made me an associate, and I've been an associate since. And I'm also one of those people that kind of doesn't sleep, so I've been pretty busy outside of the office as well. I've been working with the New York Foundation for the Arts on a festival. It was about 60 artists that are up-and-coming artists that we really worked together to build this festival. There were about 20 different venues, and it was another job, essentially. So
we missed her during that.
It's nice to be active outside of the field and do things with the community is another thing that I've been trying to do. So that's
Good.
about me.
So we will be happy afterwards to answer questions about architecture or life in New York, or can you actually make it from here to there? Yes, and you should. And so we can do all of those things. The talk we put together today is actually a very, very narrow band. It's one tiny little piece of architecture, which is where we find ourselves a great deal of the time. And it goes back to colleges and universities, and it goes back to the idea that most of them, even this one, tend to be more or less 100 years old. And at a certain point, you have to look at the stock of buildings and the place that's here and say, is this worth continuing? What are the things that are worth saving here, and how do we move on to the future? And a great deal of our work in the East, and actually a little bit around the country, is related to coming onto a campus, looking over the entire campus, and just trying to understand what are those memorable things, what are those iconic things, what are those historic things, what are those buildings that look terrible and mean a lot to people because something happened there that was important. It's just trying to evaluate how the architecture contributes to forming the culture of the place, and then we're usually asked to renovate. We've been there to look at some old building that everyone thinks is really great, and it was the first building on campus, but it's no longer functioning. So that kind of narrow band of looking at something 100 years old, thinking about how to reinvent it for today and reinvent it for the next 100 years is really almost everything that I want to talk about today. We started by walking around the campus here, and we had asked some students to put together some ideas about which buildings are keepers and which ones you could let go. And of course, in some sense, you can never let go of anything. Every building is in some ways a useful container, and there's always something you can do to make it better and bring it to the future. I now realize that this is a big sustainable thing. Like, you don't just toss out buildings. You look at them very closely and say what you can do. But I think it's more, if I could say it's more than sustainability, I would say that it is more than sustainability. It's really about the sustainability of the culture. I think that people come to school instead of going online in their pajamas. They come to a place for an experience of that place and an experience of being with other people in that place, and what is it that makes the place? It's something that you don't get online in your pajamas. So understanding what that thing is and how to preserve it and keep it relevant and interesting is what we spend a lot of time doing. There's one little riff. We were talking earlier today at lunch about how it is that when you choose a college, you go with your parents, I guess, and you get out of the car. And the minute you get out of the car, I think you have an instant reaction. Yes, this is the place. No, let's get back in the car. And so what is that? Some of it is, of course, the people that you see walking around. Looks like me. I could relate to these people. And some of it is the place itself. we've done a lot of planning work at Brown University, and I once asked a group of anthropology students at Brown how they had all picked Brown, and every one of them said the same thing. I wanted to be in a city, but not too big a city. I didn't want it would be like scary to be in New York. I didn't want to be out in the country, and I wanted to be in a place where when I was in school, I felt like I was part of the city. If any of you know the Brown campus, that's exactly it. It's buildings kind of woven into an old historic place in Providence. So they were placing themselves somewhere in the culture and the civilization where they felt comfortable. So I think it's those split-second decisions and the decisions that we make as architects, which are far longer than just split seconds. Like, okay, what are we going to do about this place? That I think form some of what we want to talk about. So we started by we put together the map. This is what you told us. Some of you told us. You identified 100-year buildings and buildings that we're graciously calling buildings that need help. Now, it may be that we should be spending this entire time talking about the buildings that need help, because if they don't need help, okay, let's not talk about them. So we walked around. I can't do it. There is no quad. I was told there was a quad. Whoop. I was told that that's the quad. It's not square. It's, quad, 4. Okay, this is a quad. All right, I've got it. That's the quad. I got that. All right. But then apparently this is a quad, too. Okay, I'll go along with that. It's known as the North Quad and the South Quad, but the North Quad is not. Yeah. I don't know. The other really interesting thing about this map, by the way, is that the most important thing that you see as you drive in is like hardly even there on the map. It barely exists, but it's the dominant thing. So we just took a really interesting walk through all of these buildings, thinking about what was, well, actually we went around the whole thing and then back, thinking about what was good about them and what needed improvement. And came up with some very simple notions, probably daylight being the key one. So these are, let's guess, are these the good ones or the bad ones? These are the good, yeah, all right. So there it is, there's a starting point, and there's another starting point, a lot of red brick. So thinking about how we can deal with those kinds of things today, here's another red brick building. So let me just start here. Gilman Hall is the oldest building on the Johns Hopkins campus, which is in Baltimore. It was 100 years old when we got there, and we were asked to completely renovate it because the building had never been renovated before. It was sacred in that it was the very first building on the campus, and there you can see the plan. In fact, when it was built, that was a quad. This was put up, and then there were just blank spaces all the way around where they would expect the campus would grow as it moved into the future. And here it was when it was first built. It was an amazing building when it was first built because the entire campus was in one building. There were classrooms, there were offices, there was the library inside of that building. And the library, in fact, wrapped around this open light well, so that light came into the library. And here you can see the pads for the future buildings. I don't know that we do that anymore, in fact. I haven't seen any pads for future buildings when I walked around here. So I think that sense of how we plan for the future, I didn't see when I was on the ground walking around here. But, maybe there's a master plan, maybe there's a map. The idea of the original building was grand spaces. This is the library reading room, which is the place where all of the students gathered, not unlike the space in Bracken, but with better light even then. And these were some of the book stacks that were wrapped around that little light well. So that was it 100 years ago. And there you can see the plan. I love this plan. So can we see the pointer? Yes, okay. So offices all around the edge, book stacks in the middle. So you could be a professor and kind of walk into the stacks and find your books. So the immediate relationship between faculty and books was very important. And then there were seminar rooms in some of the corners. So the other thing was faculty books, getting together with students and talking. This, however, is the space that we found when we got there 100 years later. That's the light well. All of the windows had been closed in. This is what had happened to the reading room. You can see the air conditioning system in the corner. And this is what had happened to the book stacks. The library had moved out into another building, and the stacks were just completely empty. So there was a lot of empty space in the middle of this building. So that was really our, that's what we found. The dean of the school wanted to make the building a home for all of the humanities on the campus, and he understood that that meant going back to a 100-year-old iconic building, but it also meant somehow looking to the future. So there are 6 things that we did, and I'm just going to talk about them in 3 groups. The first thing we understood was that the circulation system in the building did not work at all. There were 7 different stairs. Well, 6 of them are on this slide. None of them led anywhere, and there were dead-end corridors. I can't point, I'm too close. So we rebuilt the whole thing, put in 2 new stairs in the corners, and made a corridor that connected everything with everything. So the basic infrastructure was legal, code-compliant fire stairs and a circulation loop so that wherever you were, you could get anywhere else. So if you were a professor in the left-hand corner, you could find somebody in the right-hand corner. The stairs were not easy to do. We had to core them through the, hi Tony, we had to core them through the entire building, and the stairs were very precious to the alumni. We talked to the alumni, and they said, those beautiful old oval stairs, you cannot change them. They're the most wonderful thing in the building. But we had to change them because they were not code compliant. We ripped them out of this space and put back, here are the old stairs that we took out. And so, in fact, that's the same view looking back down. We completely took them out and completely rebuilt them in a way that they would look like they had always been there. So this is an important point. We could have done, well, actually we couldn't. We could have tried to do glass stairs that would be fabulously attractive to Architectural Record magazine. But our constituency in this case really was alumni who felt that the stairs were an important key element of that building, and code compliant or not, they wanted to feel that they were still there. So I think sometimes you make decisions in relation to the sort of cultural conditions that your clients find. The next thing was that we had to add a lot more space to the building. So where there had been book stacks in these yellow areas, we took out all the stacks, added office space, closed in an atrium in what had been the light well, dug a new basement because there was, in 1912, there was not a mechanical system in the building, and we needed one now. So we added about 30,000 square feet of space. We made drawings of what an atrium in that center space would look like, which people could not imagine because they were too used to seeing what they had there. We did a whole series of studies of how that interior space would be because it was both inside and outside. So we finally came up with an idea to make the whole interior out of a terracotta system, which is actually an exterior rain screen system. So it both it's an exterior material, it's a modern material, so we weren't faking in anything that had been there before, unlike the stairs. And we built some mock-ups to make sure that we really understood how it worked. We, again, demolished a lot. We put a skylight on the top, which is a tension grid skylight. So it's a very, very thin structural dimension because the whole thing is in tension. And it was all lifted up in 1 week and installed on the top of the building and then glazed in. Once the glazing was in, we went back and built a new floor in the atrium where there had been none. The floor of the atrium is actually made out of marble that was salvaged from the old book stacks. So again, it's a kind of an old new thing. And that's the finished space with a skylight over the top, the marble floor, and I'm talking to you about it as though it's an architectural thing. Actually, the important thing about this space is that it's now the gathering space for the entire Hopkins community. They all come there and hang out. There's an archaeology lab underneath. And then finally, there were some historic rooms that, again, had to be completely disassembled because we were trying to rebuild the walls in a way that would save energy. And then the whole room was reassembled again. Maybe we should talk about LEED a little bit. LEED AP.
So this building is a LEED silver building. We just found that out recently, so we're very excited. It's the first LEED building on their campus. Part of the issue with this building is that because it was 100 years old, it was not energy efficient in any way. So we looked at the exterior, we looked at the shell, trying to figure out how we could begin to make the shell more energy efficient so it wasn't leaking air all over the place. So we put in all new windows, thermally insulated, low-E glazing. We also, and you'll see in the next slide, we insulated all the exterior walls. In all of the offices and sort of exterior perimeter spaces, we put in daylighting sensors as well as occupancy sensors, so the lighting turned off when it wasn't occupied. All of the wood throughout the building, there were a lot of historic seminar rooms, all of it certified wood. What else? Really, one of the main things that we did, which was an aesthetic thing as well as an energy thing, was bringing in natural light. Using the glazing and the transoms on the exterior walls, as well as some of bringing the light into the atrium was really important to have the central spaces of the stack. The stack area really bringing light into the central area was really important. So.
Oh, that's right up. Okay.
Okay. And then another thing that we sort of began to think about when we were talking about removing the bridge was it originally had 6 surfaces that were exposed to the weather. And by getting rid of the bridge and enclosing that atrium, we now only had 1 surface that really had to contend with the weather. So obviously it improved the envelope of the building. The other thing that we did, as I mentioned, was adding insulation to all of the exterior walls. And part of the issue with that was really trying to figure out where the dew point fell, because you're changing the makeup of that wall. So we did a lot of studies trying to figure out where it fell and where to place the vapor barrier.
Incredibly complicated. So here's another 100-year-old building, completely different story. This is the oldest building on the Vassar campus, which had been built as an observatory for one of the first women astronomers in, I don't know, in the universe. And this is we were converting it into a home for the education department. So this is what it looked like 100 years ago. And another posed photograph. They were doing fake architectural photography even 100 years ago. And these are the Vassar is a women's college. So here are the women in broad daylight posing with their telescopes and looking up at the sky. So it's a kind of a publicity shot, or maybe it's a fundraising shot. I don't know, but we love this picture. And then this is Mariah Mitchell, who is the first woman astronomer, sitting with her telescope in the dome room, which was the key feature of the observatory, as you might imagine. Do you want to take a
Sure. This was actually the first project that I managed in the office. Yeah. And it was a great project to manage. It was the size of a small house, so although it came with a lot of issues, one of the important things for us was to sort of keep the historic aspects of the building, despite the fact that it was going to be repurposed for a new group moving in. The education department, the astronomy department had moved out into another building ages ago, and so the education department would be moving in. So it was important for the education department to have their own building that was theirs, but really to sort of have pieces of the building that reminded you of what the building was about. This is, actually, can I borrow this?
Sure, yeah.
Sorry.
The middle one is the pointer.
So this is the sort of plinth where the telescope used to sit. Telescope's now in the Smithsonian. But we decided to really take this out and, for ADA purposes, sort of level this floor out so that you got one continuous floor plate. And then another thing that was important in this space was that because it was very small, we didn't want it to feel small. So we really wanted it to feel like a continuous floor plate. We did that by using glass in a lot of the spaces. This is the entrance to the building, which is the reception space. One of the interesting things is, can you see that? That's pretty late. One of the ways that we sort of gave a preview of what had happened in the building in its history is we worked with a graphic designer to create a wallpaper. It's probably easier to see on this, yeah. He created these sort of pixelated images in the background that act as a wallpaper, but every once in a while you have a dot that blows up and it has a historic image of the space. It gives little quotes from Mariah Mitchell. So it's not overpowering, it's not a museum to Mariah Mitchell, but it's still parts of her history. As I said, we wanted it to seem very open and not so small, so we used glazing to create the partitions for the offices. Really also integrating the bookcases and keeping those walls as clean as possible really helped to make the offices feel larger than they actually were. This is the actual dome room, which they wanted to create a seminar room in the space. And what's interesting is because when we came to the space, the tin roof, it was just one thin layer of tin. So it leaked like a sieve. There was, we came in, it was raining, even though it wasn't raining outside. And so we had to build a dome on top of the dome. And when the contractor was sort of building the space, he was like, what do you want to do with the roof of the dome room? And we said, actually, just scrape off the paint and leave, we really want to see the history of that room. So we left.
I should say, too, that a big part of this was, I think, getting the client to buy into of what you keep and what you let go of. And we had a 90-year-old client on this, and she was the Vassar historian, and she kept coming to the meetings and saying, we have to keep the history of this place. We have to keep the history of this place. And we, kept panicking and thinking, what's going to happen? What does she mean? And when we came in with the idea of the pixelated wallpaper, she looked at it and she said, "Oh, this is great. This is exactly what I meant. I was afraid you were going to keep a bunch of dusty old relics all over this place." So you never know how you can bring people in and what to them is important. And to her, what was important was the message and not the actual pieces of stuff, which is a good thing.
She was happy in the end, which was important. And this is, again, looking up. This used to be the telescope shutter. So we removed the shutter for where the telescope used to sort of move about and replaced it with a skylight, which really brought in a lot of natural light and made it so it's such a lovely space when you sit in there for classes.
Although we had to nail it down. It used to move around.
We did. We pointed it to her birthplace, and then we nailed the entire dome used to move, which is probably why it was tin and very lightweight. So we had to nail it down because we couldn't continue to keep it moving. So this is another project that is under construction. The State University of New York College at Geneseo. It's a mouthful. It used to be an old high school, and it's changed hands a few times, and now the campus owns the building again, and they came to us wanting to make it their sort of flagship building to put in groups like admissions, alumni relations, eventually the president, groups like that. So this is the site plan as we sort of found it. The building was sort of off on its own. Wasn't really part of the main campus, and it became very important for us and as well as the client to really connect it to their sort of main space and make it feel like it's part of the campus. So we worked with our landscape architect to really make this a big open space where students could start tours and sort of activate this not quad.
Well, that's a quad on the other side, maybe, sort of, not sure, right.
The other thing that was very important to the client was sustainability. Our firm sort of generally works in a sustainable way, which made the jump very easy to have a very sustainable building. One of the things that they asked us was, for the mechanical system, what's going to be the best system to go with? So we did a life cycle cost analysis and came up with a geothermal field. We did test wells. We eventually came up with 144 wells, 450 feet deep. They were just installed. They look wonderful. You can see these little wires poking up out of the ground, 144 of them. So The other thing that is also interesting is all of the paving is pervious pavement, so it's a very sustainable site.
There's another moment about this. We realize that we've done this on several campuses now, taking a green space and putting in geothermal wells. And it just dawns on me that that campus quads are, of course, the perfect setting for geothermal wells, because I hope you're saying that the quads are the sacred spaces, that buildings will always be built around the edge, but you will never put buildings in the middle, because ultimately, I just didn't say this in an architecture school, ultimately the spaces on the campus are actually more important than the buildings. So there are all these, they know it's true, there are all these locations that you can make more special and make more productive by incorporating geothermal wells. So we are starting to propose this on many campuses, old and new, as a way of giving quads even more life. Because I think the wires don't stick up forever.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. We haven't done any of the grading. We haven't put back the sort of landscaping, but they are currently poking up. Eventually they will not. Another thing that we tend to find, and I'm sure Francis can probably speak about this more, is a client will always come to us and say, here's the program, these are the number of people or the number of spaces that we want you to fit in this building. And we all know that if you're given an existing building, there's only so much you can pack into that building. So a lot of times we have to do interventions, additions. And this particular building was, the client was just the same. They had too much program. And the nice thing is that formally the building was missing. There was a little addition done right here that was brick, and it was sort of missing its hat. So it was an easy it was easy to convince the client that it just needed its hat here to sort of fit all of your program and finish the building. So these are a couple of exterior renderings.
It's another case of making it look like it has always been there for 100 years, I think.
So the plan originally was, you can't see it.
Yeah, wrong aspect ratio. It's disappearing.
Yikes. Well, it used to be a classroom building, so there were large classrooms sort of at both sides of the building. Actually, I could probably do it here. So there were big classrooms sort of here, and one large corridor that went down the middle. And we were sort of asked to put offices, a lot of offices. So we had to kind of really transform those classrooms into small offices, which created a circulation pattern that was instead 2 corridors with sort of back of house functions in the middle spaces. Another sort of interesting feature was creating a recital hall for the School of Arts with a grand lobby for pre and post function spaces. This is how we found it. Again, a sort of dismal place.
Just like the place we went through this morning.
It does look like the Bell Building. So if they need help.
The ceilings are higher here.
Yeah. Another space that was, so this actually, there used to be a sort of 3rd floor space in here. And the admissions really wanted a wow space that they could bring students to and sort of say, this is your college, this is, where you should go to university. So we took out this floor and created this sort of double height space with an interesting roof, or an interesting, I think I have a better picture of it. Yeah. This is a rendering showing a sort of slatted ceiling panel, trying to create that wow space in the tower. Again, I mentioned earlier, daylighting is, well, Francis mentioned it earlier, the daylighting is super important to the way that everyone works, the way that people sort of live their daily life. So we really made a lot of the corridors glazed to sort of bring natural light into both the lobby and actually all of the central spaces.
I now realize not only is the aspect ratio off, but everything is stretched.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, it's too late. Okay, onwards.
Again, I mentioned the auditorium. This used to be a recital hall, or not this used to be a gymnasium that we, closer?
What? Talk faster?
Talk faster.
So ignore this man. Okay.
Okay. It used to be a gymnasium that we decided it would be ideal for a recital hall. It was a really, really large space, raw space, and when we looked at it, we thought it would be really interesting to put 2 little wooden jewel-like boxes in the space and keep the outside as a sort of white box. So
if you click again something, I believe that's...
Let's see. Oh, there we go.
It will run.
So this is a catwalk that we really tried to pull away. We tried to keep things away from that sort of exterior wall and have the 2 little wooden jewel spaces that I was talking about. And the structure in the space was really, really minimal. So we were trying to keep as many things off of the ceiling as possible, which is actually really difficult in a recital hall. So, this is Arcadia.
So I thought it would end up by just showing a project where we found a relatively new campus, and we're trying to set it up in a way that it will be around for another 100 years. So we're at Arcadia University, which is outside of Philadelphia. It was, except for an old castle, which was the original home of the university. It was built in, I don't know what, 1880, 1875. All the rest of the campus was built in the 1970s, so it's very similar to what's going on here. And in fact, our first project there was for this library, which is at the bottom of the hill, and the big castle is behind us. And they had been a college, and they were converting to a university, and so they felt that the most important thing they could do was to give the library more prominence, since that will be the way of kind of establishing for them the transition from college to university. But there it was in a hole in the ground, and the predominant feature of this building was the mechanical penthouse. That was what you saw when you were in the castle. So we took a look at the site plan. Here's the castle. We're going downhill, and there was the library. And we started to think about a way to put a new front onto this building that would begin to identify something in the middle as a quad. And in fact, it was very clear to us that a quad has 4 sides. That's the deal. That's where the word comes from. And that the more you could create a fixed sense of geometry in a place in which there were a lot of different geometries. This is coming in at an angle. These are square to each other, but that was it. That would all help to create a sense of a center. So our new addition, which is the red piece, resolves both of these geometries, looks out on a green quad, and looks up at the castle. So we were trying to create, 100 years later, a building as important as the castle, equal to but not greater than. So this was actually a design competition, so we made a little sketch of how this whole thing would work. The quad it's an undersized soccer field, which doesn't prevent them from playing soccer. But so the center is not just a ceremonial space, but also an academic space. So they built the library. So this is it. What the library had been missing was a grand 2-story space. And so, in fact, the upper floor of the library is a big reading room that looks out on the quad. So again, the principle of planning the building was to put those rooms in the building that look back out onto the university and reestablish establish what is a sense of university life. Then we were called back 3 years later and asked to put another building in. They wanted to add a student center. And we went back and looked at this quad space again, and there was a gym over here. And we said, let's do the same strategy. Let's put a new building that attaches onto the gym structure, and again, makes even more strong the line of this quad. Yes, we've just finished a bunch of geothermal wells in the center of this once again, but this building creates a very strong line. The curves of this funny old castle, which had first reappeared in our library design, again kind of show up in the roof of this student union building. And it connects to 2 different levels of the campus. You'll see you come across a bridge on the upper level, downstairs, and out at the lower level. This is still the rendering. I can't tell anymore. So this was the rendering of what this building would look like. The materials of this building started out, you can just see the stone castle in the distance. And so the transformation of stone, 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 terracotta, glass, 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 and if you saw the rest of the slide, would be all glass. So as you're moving along the 300-foot length of the building, it's transforming in materials from old to new. It was very important to us to have places, again, in this building where you stand here and you look back at the castle. So again, the idea is put students in a place where they are aware of the history and culture of the campus and they know why they're there. And then when you look in the other direction, there's a ground level terrace that's looking back towards the library. So every view out reinforces the importance of why you're there. This is it. It's really terrible that we're missing the ends of these slides. Okay, so it was just finished in January. So this is the actual building taken from the same viewpoint. There are no students yet because the temperature was about 20 degrees on this particular day. But you can begin to see the bridge coming across, the porch that looks back at the castle, and then student spaces inside that ultimately lead out. This is it from the other side, still under construction. From the castle side, there's a big porch here. This is our second building that we finished that the president of the university got so excited that he decided to move in. The first one was Geneseo that Natalie was talking about. So this is now rebuilt as the president's office because he decided that he wants to be where the action is and where the students are. This is a section through it, so there are grand public spaces down here. This is all student lounges, and then the second floor with this skylight above are all student offices and conference rooms, and the president's office is there. So here it is in plan. You come across the bridge, which we're not seeing because we're on the floor below, into a cafe, student lounge, out the door to the library, and then you're looking down into a multi-purpose space. This was a rendering that we made of it since the curve was the most important element of this thing. The curve is all covered in wood slats, and it's really this single element that ties the whole building together. This is an actual photograph of the curve moving through and looking down into the cafe space. This is also a big wall for showing movies. Here's a rendering of the ground floor, and here it is almost finished. This is looking out at the campus level. And then finally on the second floor, looking down into the cafe, looking out onto the porch and looking towards the library. And here this is just about finished. You can see this wood slat wall folding through the whole building. I hate these slides. They're all distorted now. Okay, and here we are looking back from the library. So light is coming in from this clear story up above, and then you can look out and barely make out the castle in the distance. And here we are at the very end looking towards the library. So I would just end by saying that in some ways this might be the most important slide of all, because this is the ribbon cutting at the opening of the Arcadia Commons. I think what we all try to do is start out together, have a reasonably successful middle experience, but mostly we all try to end together in a place where everybody is very happy about the outcome and feels that what they have tried to accomplish has actually been accomplished. Thank you. Should we answer questions? Should we do that? Somebody. We have time for, all right. And we have answers, too. We've got plenty of answers.
I hope you do.
We'll make them up. Questions, please. Total silence. They're silent. They're all silent. Tony.
When you do the analysis of the historic structure and enclosing the wall, do your structural engineers ever find some situations that really begin to change programmatically where you could put things like stacks or the ability to open up a floor that used to act as a diaphragm? I mean, how much does an old building reveal itself after you start to really analyze it?
Plenty is the answer. I think the optimistic answer to that, however, is that structural changes are relatively inexpensive in the overall scheme of things. So we have found that it's, kind of easy to say, well, let's put a stair here, and let's close that in, and let's make that open. And so those are easy things to do, and very worthwhile in understanding how the whole building can change. So we didn't even show you in Hopkins, we dug a new basement, and that was relatively not so easy to do. So we have photographs of the basement. We had to come out away from the foundations because we didn't want to upset the foundations of the building. So there are diagonal walls, and then the basement is in the center of all of that. But that was a really, really good thing to do because it gave us cheap space to put mechanical equipment that we could then send up through the whole building. So I think the idea that you should be afraid of structural change is probably, you could let go of that. It's much harder to deal with a historical commission, I would say. We're doing a project right now in New York where we're just about to look at whether we can add another floor on top of a theater in a historic district. And the theater manager said exactly the same thing to us. He said, oh, it's going to cost so much money. How could we even do that? I said to him, it would be cheaper to put 4 giant columns around this building than to pay the zoning lawyer to work a year and a half on getting this thing changed. So, were you waiting? I thought she was studying all the time. That was waiting?
There are things that you can never learn until you experience. There are things that it's invaluable to your sort of education in sort of being able to put together a building that I would never have known without working for 3 years. But it also might have been a little bit easier. You guys can, I think, can take the tests right after school. I had to wait the sort of 3 or 4 years, whatever it was, and do an internship, and then I could start my tests. I would get a few of them out of the way immediately because it's harder to sort of put yourself into that school mode where, and I was working too at the same time, where you're coming home from working all day and then saying, okay, I'm going to work some more. So I would do as many as you can early on.
Francis, besides historic disconcerts, how cooperative do you find code folks in working with you from early in the project to meet code restrictions or requirements?
Oh, not at all. I think we have, no, there is a serious answer to that. I think when you start a project, you really have no idea who the stakeholders are. I mean, you think you know that someone's paying your bills, so they must be the client, so you get that. But then in the case of the college, there'll be a whole group of alumni that'll have strong feelings. And then there will be code officials, and then there will probably be historic commissions, and then there will be communities that feel threatened by anything that the college does. So I think what we do when we start a project is we just go around and talk to everybody. And what we're doing is getting real input and finding out where the flashpoints are. And we're also, in some ways kind of buying their cooperation. Sometimes people just have to get it off their chest and tell you what's on their minds. And once they've said that, they're okay. But at Hopkins, it was by talking to a group of donors. They weren't just plain old alumni. They were donors, and I was there saying, "Oh, isn't it wonderful? We're starting this great project, and we're going to blow out the stairs, and we're going to blow out the roof, and we're going to." And they said, "Oh, no, you can't. No, the stairs. No, we remember going up those. This is a precious moment to us." So that was donors. Code officials. It's usually the fire departments. They're the tricky ones. They're really, because they won't even talk to you in the beginning. But I mean, the answer is talk to everybody, listen to everybody, and then you hear what the issues are. So it's essential. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. I would say, you know, I was just describing that in practice you go around and talk to everybody and they tell you things. Well, one of the limitations of studios, you can't go around and talk to everybody. But you can do a lot of research. And one thing that has been tremendously important to us, especially when we're working on 100-year-old buildings, is to go back and find out what was the original intent of that building and what did the architect originally lay out and what's behind those hundreds of years of renovation. So you can read the mind of the original architect. In the case of Hopkins, again, when we looked at that plan, which I just love that plan. So there were enormous windows around that light well that were bringing light into graduate student carrels. In fact, I had some of the old photographs of 100 years ago. Well, when we looked at the building today, there were tiny little aluminum windows. You know, the windows were this big in spaces that had been 12 feet high. So the old photographs showed us the intention of the original architect in thinking about bringing in natural light. But more important, it showed us that there were big openings there underneath the brick. So that just that piece of research was eye-opening. And while you all like to, I mean, of course we all think that we're brilliant and no one has ever been brilliant in the history of the earth until we were born, and thank goodness for us. But when you get into the kind of minds of the way people were thinking 100 years ago, why did they put it here? Why did they do that? What were they saying? You begin to develop a kind of respect for the real, for, you know, hundreds of years of issues. Because I think, I mean, in some ways, we're just building, we're trying to make something a little better than it used to be, but you can't erase and start over again. Also, I guess I have to say, having just taken this tour today, that one of the wonderful things about working in old buildings is that many of them were built before air conditioning and before electric light, and what do they have? Giant windows and very tall ceilings. And what was the depressing thing about our walk today? I mean, you know, and we walk into a building with low ceilings and low windows, and everybody was like this, you know. And then we come into a place with big, high ceilings, and everyone's, oh, this is great. We really like it here. So you very frequently find that old buildings have a kind of architectural integrity that is lacking in some of the things that happened in the 60s and 70s of the last century. So, long answer. Yeah. I hadn't the foggiest idea when I was in that. I don't know. Do you have a career path? I
don't think I chose specifically.
Yeah,
it was more, I mean, for me, it was more about the firm and not necessarily about the exact type of building. Being with a firm that did good work, interesting work, was more important to me than saying, oh, I really want to do hospitals, and Clement Halsband doesn't do hospitals, so I can't work there. So.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to be ready to say yes. I think that's probably the key. When something good comes along, you have to have the sense to say, yes, I'm going to do that, and not saying no. I mean, I started teaching pretty early on, almost right after I got out of school. I was teaching at Columbia, so I was interested in university stuff. But the first big yes was that Jim Polshek was the dean of the architecture school at Columbia, and Robert Clement and I were both teaching there, and he decided that Columbia needed to change its rules, and instead of not letting the faculty build anything, they had to encourage the faculty to build things. So we got a call one day from Columbia, and we were being interviewed for the biggest job we had ever had. Up to then, we thought ourselves as, I don't know, museum architects or house architects. I don't know what you think. Who remembers what you think of when you're starting out? You just try and, you know, any kind of job is a good job. So we were interviewed for this big Columbia project, and we got the job. So then suddenly we were university architects. Then we had, instead of having to make the excuse that because we've never done one before, we bring the freshness of our viewpoint and our enthusiasm for this. Suddenly we were able to say, oh, well, we've done this before. We know how to do these. We've done one before. So you fall into a groove and you take advantage of whatever you can and keep moving with it. I guess that's my career plan, I think. Not helpful, is it? I don't know. Yeah. Oh, she told you. Yes. Well, you can't have her. She's coming back with me. Let's be clear about that.
I know. 8 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. I take complete credit. I'll tell you what we do take credit for, though. I'm going to interrupt you and say this, that I think schools that train people to be whole architects is something that we look for when we are hiring, and we are not drawn to people that can merely do fabulous 3D and 4D CAD, because sometimes those people don't know what architecture is. So places like Ball State are very near and dear to us. I just want to say that. This was not an accident. But I interrupted you.
I think I actually, in particular, got really lucky because Frances is a woman and she was sort of an owner of the firm. There was not the culture that you sometimes hear about in other workplaces. There wasn't any prejudice, because I'm sure she would sort of smack them down.
It's true.
I think in terms of advice, I think it would be more in construction than anything.
That's worth talking about.
Yeah, the one
yeah.
thing that I've experienced is you do get the prejudice in the sort of construction end, because you are a woman and they're like, oh, you're some silly little girl that doesn't know anything, and you really have to stand, hold your ground. You do know something. You have a degree and you have been working in the field, and so I think one thing that I've sort of gained is really, really thick skin with contractors. And
she's an amazing tough guy. There are guys in the office that are embarrassed when she starts yelling on the phone. That's why. I won't mention any names. Well, maybe that's it. We've said it all. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and thank you.